Welcome, everybody, to the Bass Fug Podcast. Today, we have a very special guest all the way from Seattle, Washington, Dan Taylor, a.k.a. Pedestrian Tactics. How are you, Dan?
Hey, I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. Sorry about all the mix-up, as I apologized 20 times before the pre-interview. Let's get right to it. Producer Dojo, can you talk about it a little bit, and can you explain what it is? We had Sean Notman on before, Spiderhound, who told us a little bit about it.
Yeah.
But can you talk about it? But can you also give, I'll have the follow up. I want to talk about teaching. So, but tell us what Producer Dojo is first.
So, Il Gates. I mean, Il Gates could tell you a lot more about the extent of the Producer Dojo, but I ended up meeting him because he wanted me to open for him at a set in California a while back at this really crazy festival. I ended up opening for him. We connected, and he had just started this Producer Dojo in LA, and that was a physical space that you could go in. It was set up with all kinds of sweet studio equipment. I have not been there myself, but it looked really sweet. And he's the kind of mental blend, the kind of personality that is both talented at the music production side, but also talented at regurgitating it and teaching it to someone else. And so that's kind of, he's spun up in terms of tutorials, presets, live setups, all that kind of stuff. He had that out on his website. So I think he started this thing called the IL methodology. Again, he'd be able to give more on that, but he invited me to this kind of prototype that they were doing, which allowed artists to book time with other people who wanted to learn production skills. You could book time with them and then have a personal one-to-one session. So that was something I was already looking at doing, and so we connected, and now I'm doing that through him.
Can you talk about what? Oh, sorry, my mic went down. Can you talk about what is the key to reaching a beginner with the knowledge of creating music production, creating music and music production topics? Like, how do you start? How do you begin to teach? Say you have a 55-year-old mother of three who reaches out to you and she says, "Hey, my kids listen to Skrillex, and I kind of want to see if I could do that." Can you teach that person?
Well, yeah. I mean, everyone kind of comes out of the nooks and crannies with something that is interesting them in some way, and they usually start with some tool that they have, or they see something that they want to do and they want to make that. And the key to beginning with that is finding the closest tool that you have to your fingertips and beginning there. And when I started out, it was, let's see, I started out like it's 15, 20 years ago, playing this online game that was like a Coke advert game for Coca-Cola that actually had a little like mini DAW running in the browser in Flash Player, and you could compose these little crappy songs and share them with people and get likes and all that stuff. And I thought that concept of loops was so cool that I ended up getting Acid Music Studio, and then from there Acid Pro, and I was just downloading little loop packs and putting that together. Then I switched over to the Apple side of things and got into GarageBand and just absolutely broke the program at its seams before I upgraded to Ableton. And it was just because I'd hear some sound. Like, this was the early days of Pendulum, when they were able to cram themselves into the Showbox Soto, which, for context, is a fairly small venue in Seattle. They came up to play, and it's like, gosh, I want to do work like that. What can I do? Like, how can I achieve a similar sound using the tools that I have available to me? And in my opinion, that is where you start. You look at what have you already been using, and how can you try to push it to its limits to get that sort of sound.
So
the things that Yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna say. So if they had like an iPad, is that like too novice or novice or
Uh,
however, or can you work with that?
Not at all. I wish that I would actually love to move my workflow over to the iPad. I've been able to do that for nearly everything else, digital painting, some 3D rendering stuff, but I mean, Ableton hasn't ported itself over there. There are a few music apps that you can, you can get started on there. If I had the patience, it'd be fun to just try to create a full song using just the GarageBand on iPad. There are a few other apps that provide better functionality. I think FL Studio Mobile. The point is kind of listening to something that you want to make or that you want to make something similar to and breaking it down into meaningful components.
Yeah.
And understanding how can I achieve those with what tool I have. Because there's especially with the new Ableton release, I'm pretty hardcore Ableton right now. With the latest release, there's like 6 or 7 different ways to achieve a sidechain compression effect. You can do it all kinds of ways. Now I'm just doing volume automations. I'm too lazy to use a proper compressor. I'd rather actually just draw the automation curve in. So I'm for context, it's almost like I have the volume knob in the program and I'm just turning it up and down when the drums hit so that you get this punchy sound.
Yeah. It's crazy now with the amount of tools and software that's out. You don't need an Atari ST and guard your diskettes anymore if you're a sampler. You could get started with what you have, like you're saying,
Absolutely. And regardless of what background you're from, you can take the tools that you've learned from that background and apply them. And I quickly noticed that when I came from a graphic design and Photoshop background. So I pop into Ableton and I look at each track just like you would Photoshop layers. So I start applying equalizations and effects in a similar way that you might apply effects to something in Photoshop. And then I go hang out with someone with an audio engineering background and they look at what I'm doing on the EQ and they're like, oh, that's a little extreme. Why would you do that? And I'm like, well, because it sounds good. I'm approaching it from a completely different background than someone who's used to plugging things in with wires. And to that effect, my sound probably comes out a certain way from that reason. So, if someone comes from a completely different background, there's nothing wrong with that. The point is, what tools can you transfer from what you're already doing into this? Because that's how innovation happens.
And with your background, your aesthetic you have an aesthetic on your pages, and that's something you bring to the table. The 55-year-old, mother of 3 or whatever, she knits, but she knits a really cool mixtape and hands them out at shows. And you're like, I've never seen a crocheted CD case ever in my life. I'm going to check this out. I have a couple questions. First of all, I like that you're talking about breaking things down into smaller chunks. This is mathematical thinking, right? And I know not everybody's really into math, but when you have a problem, you need to break it down into small pieces, and then you sort of find the easiest things to eliminate first. Pick any game, Tetris, Mario, Picross, whatever. That's how you get to further into the games. I'm wondering, because I think there's something that people miss when you talk about courses and learning online and stuff. What if people aren't really good students? What if people kind of, they weren't so great in school or whatever? If you sit down and have a session with them, is that a problem, or is this as you go, you could pause the video or whatever?
I mean, I don't think anyone's a bad learner. I think if they are, they went to a crappy school that didn't make the learning fun. The point is, we're humans. Everyone wants to gather. Everyone wants to put things together. We want to copy. That's such an evolutionary trait that the point in learning something new is to fill your brain with something more. Even if it means you're watching something on Netflix, you're still picking up something from a new environment. And the point is just to capitalize on those messages that you're picking up and transfer them into something new. And everyone has a reason that they want to turn those things into something new. For me, early on, it was the pressure of schoolwork. It was the pressure of college. I get so pent up in classes that I thought were worthless. I go take it out on electronic music, and that it was very easy to take the stress, the tension, all that stuff, and transition it into another medium and release it through that. You don't have to be pent up and stressed to make music, but the point is taking something that you're taking in and translate it into some medium. That could be painting, that could be,
Totally.
absolutely anything.
Totally. And you're creating culture, you're pushing the culture of humanity forward, right? If you go and break us down, it's like, what separates us from squirrels? It's like, well, squirrels don't they don't have a whoever, Benny Benassi or whomever, they don't have Ableton. No offense if there's any squirrels listening. I don't mean to like talk down to you or whatever, but the fact that you're able to take things that are inside of you and communicate them in ways that are beyond the linguistic is really healthy. Whether or not you release the music to anybody or whether or not you play a big festival, the fact that you're expressing yourself through some type of medium is a fantastic thing. Do you agree, or is that just woo-wee?
Oh no, it's absolutely, it's self therapy, really. Like, I mean, who was it? I forget the artist that talked about how it, saved him from a huge bout of depression and stuff. Because it's a way of taking energy, taking something that you're taking in and translating it out, finding a way to exercise it out in some way.
Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit to game design. Is game design similar to how you approach producing and maybe even teaching, or is this like a whole other ball of wax? Because I feel like video games now. No. who is it? The movie critic said, "Oh, video games aren't art." It's like, man, like, you're crazy. Like, video games are the pinnacle of art, of fine art. You have music, you have visual art, you have audio. It's absolutely captivating how much culture can be condensed into a good game. You take the greats like Kojima, Miyamoto, whomever, Yu Suzuki, and you have the Shenmues, you have the Breath of the Wilds, you have all these fantastic games. These are high culture, if you ask me. When the video games, or when the aliens find the video games, they're going to be like, holy shit, these guys were up to something.
Yeah. I mean, you could look at a video game as an evolution of art, as an interaction with the viewer, in a similar way to when people talk about Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, whatever you want to, however you want to delineate those. The idea of Web 1 was right at the start of the internet. People just put everything about them on a page. It was just like sticking a signpost in the ground. Like, this is me. Here's a picture of me. Here's all my information. Read my blog. Is a sort of one-dimensional. You look at it and consume the information.
Yeah. A
Web 2 example would be something like Gmail, where it's a service that you use, and it's now an interaction. It becomes a tool that you can use. And if you pivot over to art, I see video games as kind of a almost Web 2 equivalent of an art piece, where as opposed to being a movie or a piece of audio or a visual piece, it's something that the viewer now gets to interact with and change the outcome of what this piece is.
It's kind of like making a mixtape almost, where, if you only like 3 songs on the album, well, you can put it on a cassette and then you got what you wanted, sort of thing, right?
But also even like a cassette that understands you and starts playing the music that is relevant to the viewer. So, I mean, games are an exciting medium, and I had gotten into it a few years back, right when the pandemic started. I had always wanted to learn programming because it was so scary to me, and it kind of came about because some programmers were listening to my music. One guy tweeted about it. They said, "Oh, today's coding session, I was listening to some Pedestrian Tactics." I was like, people are coding to my music. And I didn't realize that. So I wrote this EP that was all focused on that. It was called Nerds Trying to Dance. And it was so fun to make this. It was like, okay, what would be electronic dance music that programmers would listen to? And I kind of dove into that. Pretty soon I got interested in C# myself. And so I had always wanted to learn to make things work. So the video game thing is kind of a tangent off of the project, but this whole project, the Pedestrian Tactics thing, has just been about expressing through various mediums. Music has been the primary one, but it's the whole thing is about expressing an opinion.
And programming is very expressive as well. A lot of people might think it's just some magic box kind of thing, but there's, especially with C# too, the way how they declare the variables and stuff, like it's a lot different than other languages. I think a lot of, maybe in the last 10 years, people started to pick up, because of the social network and Steve Jobs, sort of the creative potential of being able to program. Do you feel like that, maybe this isn't so much related to music, but do you kind of see programmers maybe being a subset of artists, or do you even see them as being artists?
Absolutely. It's just I mean, my knowledge is limited, but I think that educational system around what it means to be a developer is still sometimes fairly traditional. This is how you do this. This is how you solve this problem, as opposed to kind of how to express yourself through something that you write. I was fortunate enough to go to a design school in Washington, Western Washington University, for an industrial design program, which was all about physical product design. And they focused on brainstorming and mind mapping and how to get the inner critic in your head out for as long as possible while you spit out ideas. We were constantly critiqued for the amount of content that we generated rather than the quality of it until it would come to critique time. So it was like, you need 6 pages of thumbnails by tomorrow, and you're going to quickly ditch your idea of, well, what's the perfect idea for this product? And you're just going to start drawing because you need a sheer quantity of things.
Yeah.
So that the brainstorming mind mapping process is incredibly healthy, and I think incredibly applicable to many different professions. My buddies who have started in development, I didn't get that their education system taught it in the same way. So I think a design perspective can be used across a lot more mediums than it currently is.
Can you maybe I want to stick around here for a little bit and kind of explore the school that you went to and some of the ideas, because you mentioned something that, holy cow, for however long I've made music, and you too probably, people they don't release their freaking music, and you listen to it and you're like, this is awesome, and they're like, and they have this weird limiting belief, like that it has to be perfect, but it's like perfection from their own perspective. Like, I'll hear a friend's music, I'll hear a friend's album, I'll be like, this is great, and it's his first album, but he doesn't want to put it out. Sorry if you're listening, but I don't mean to, or whatever. This is for an example, and I'm thinking, like, guy, this is great. Like, why can't you put this out? And there's this weird perfection. And you were talking about earlier that with the mind mapping and the brainstorming, you guys generate 60 thumbnails. It almost like kills that ego that prevents you, that maybe not even prevents it, protects you from releasing something. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Maybe elaborate?
Yeah, I realized that in my own journey, it takes, if you're in the middle of a project, it takes an equal amount of confidence to either say, I don't have many followers, this work is crap, I'm still a beginner, I should just put it out there because I can continue working, to basically say, I'm crap, this is crap, it doesn't matter, I'll finish it, right? It takes the same amount of confidence to be able to say that as it does to be able to say, I'm doing okay, people say they like my work, this may not be perfect, but I think it's finished, let's press go. So it's almost like hitting that export button is just as difficult whether you're good and well known or whether you're bad and not known. You need to be able to either say, I'm crap, this is crap, or I'm good, this is good, let's go. It requires a certain confidence piece, and a good way to get there is to take the work outside of yourself. And that, funny enough, this is something that we've gone over the last couple private session calls that I've had with people is how do you how do you press the go button? When do you say the track is finished? How do you keep yourself procrastinating on it? And I think the key is to pull the project outside of you, create some sort of basis by which the project is finished that doesn't have to do with, well, do I like it? Is it my best work? So say something like, this track's going to be finished in 4 days. So now that's the metric. That's the time that I hit export. Or I'm going to make this track using only one sample. I'm going to use this sampled voice. I'm going to modulate it so that it turns into a bass drum and build the whole thing. So then it's like, once you're finished, it's not like, is this my greatest work? You're like, I made a track with one sample. That's awesome. So the goal, once the goal is outside of yourself, it's much easier to say, okay, this is finished. And anything you can do to make that happen. I even noticed, like, over the pandemic, I stopped producing. I lost all inspiration for like a year. And going back and writing a track, it felt like you go to the gym and suddenly you're all flabby again. I had that same perfectionism pop back in. I'd work on something. I'm like, I don't know. And it was like, I needed to cap it. I needed to say, okay, I'm going to give this 48 more hours and then I'll throw it in the trash or do something that takes it outside of myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that. I don't know if it's Steven Spielberg or George Lucas, or that famous quote where it's like, great movies don't get released, they escape, or something like that. It kind of seems a little bit like that. But
well, that's a good quote. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, the losing inspiration thing. This is if I had $1 for every guest that tells me about like their period, you know what I mean? It's like Bowie and Eno had their Berlin Wall, and then there's like the writer's block period in every artist's discography, I feel. How I guess you touched on it a little bit, but how do you get inspired again? Besides, I guess, making small challenges for yourself, like you said, but do you think it's like tied to an emotion, or what was it that made you lose inspiration in the first place? Was it just being lethargic, sitting around in sweatpants playing Animal Crossing all day, or what was it? What was it that did it for you?
I think it varies from person to person. A really common way to run into writer's block, which I've done plenty, is when your critique mind and your creative mind are both firing at the same time. And that's a difficult one to get out of. You need to silo each one, and that learning to notice when your critiquing mind is coming in. You're writing something and then you immediately play it back and listen to it and you go, is this good? That's where you get into writer's block, right? You got to just write it, be like, okay, I did that. Now let's write another one, and just keep doing that for a while. When the critique mind comes in, that's really difficult. Sometimes any mindfulness practices, meditation, something that helps you notice when your critique mind, that helps. What the pandemic, for me, that felt like an empath one. You see and feel the emotions of the people around you. And personally, for me, when I'm around someone else who's sick, they're coughing, I feel sick.
Oh, wow.
If I'm around someone who's sad, even if they go into the other room, I sort of feel like, did I do something wrong? How did I contribute to this? So once everyone was confined to their homes and all you could listen to on Spotify was music of the past, it felt like a lot of artists took a break right then. There were a few of those that just like went hardcore. They were like, I've already been home. This is amazing. I felt like I could do that. But once I felt this sort of collective shift, it was really hard personally for me to do anything. And I think points like that, whether it's caused by a global thing or whether it's caused by something internal, I think it's very important to sit down and ask, obviously I don't want to make anything right now. So what should I be listening to? What should I be consuming right now? Clearly I need to be listening to something because my body doesn't want to make something. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I want to throw a tip out there for a second. Something that I was doing for a while because I kind of had the same sort of pandemic, like, I had like a recorder next to like my TV, and I would just record samples from like stuff I was watching. And then I ended up, even though I wasn't really making a lot of music, I just ended up having like 30 minutes of just like stupid stuff from like anime and like, you know what I mean? And when I went over the samples, I was like, these are really gold little outtakes. Like I have to put them in something, and then it started to kind of grease the wheels a little bit. I think that's a good one. I just
That's
want
that. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. It sounds like you were able to kind of honor the place that you were in, and that's the difficulty when you feel this like, oh, I can't create. Really, it's you're in a different state right now. You're just not accepting that you're in that different state.
Yeah, totally. And it's weird. A lot of us, I don't know if it's the drugs or the booze or whatever with the DJ lifestyle, but we kind of get null to our sort of just our own emotional landscapes. Like I guess I'll use that term, and we stop kind of listening to stuff. You know what I mean? But sorry, yeah.
Oh, I get it. It's interesting that you say that also because I always felt like an outcast in the music world because I didn't start from DJing or anything like that. So when I'd go to a club, for me, it wasn't like the drugs, the booze or anything like that. I started out in such a almost like homeschooled bedroom lifestyle that the people that I connected with who were fans of my work lived such a completely different lifestyle than what I was experiencing. But there was this connection that happened between my output and their input, which was fascinating. I went to a show and someone was like, I listened to your track Ice and I was doing acid or something like that. And I was like, oh, I didn't design that track for acid. And I was like, what was it like? And he said, I was so scared. I was like, I bet you were. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry.
I was eating popcorn when I was making that. Yeah.
Right. But in terms of the sort of dissociation as artists with that mental place, when you get blocked, I completely understand that just from the perspective of I am used to creating stuff all the time. It's actually a chore for me to sit down and play a video game or read a book. It literally feels like a chore. And I wish I really have to make pointed effort to consume content because I think it's a really good idea. Because sometimes I'm just running on empty. I'm just creating for the sake of creating. And at those points, you need to stop and listen.
I want to talk about your solo stuff. We were I wanted to get the teaching and we got some good stuff out of there. But I want to ask you some more kind of sniper questions on some tracks and some stuff that you're you're doing. If you don't mind, what is with the imagery of all the buildings? When I was on your Bandcamp, I just saw like rooftops. Like it was like, speaking of anime, it was like Ghost in the Shell or something like that. Can you explain the lore? Am I missing something there?
Or? A lot of influence. I mean, my original alias went by Corporate, and a lot of that had to do with my own sort of pent up frustration about industry and mega corporations, and not exactly frustration, but sort of this fascination with the idea of the world being managed by massive corporate entities and robots and all this kind of cyberpunk stuff. And that's just growing up as a 90s child and watching The Matrix when you were 13 and gathering these ideas of what if everything is a lie and, very 90s ideas. Right.
Getting Adbusters from your art teacher. Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, the aesthetic was a subliminal drawing from all of that. And as it's evolved into the Pedestrian Tactics project, I got familiar with some incredible brands like Neubau in Berlin, which is they make fonts, they make incredible typography, they do posters and architectural books, and getting familiar with a clothing brand Acronym. They have $2,000 technical jackets. Really incredible work. Also high typography focus. They probably grew up watching The Matrix as well. The Lion King wasn't my Bible, like everyone else's. So I guess a lot of that aesthetic came from.
I saw that in the theater. I got the popcorn bucket. I remember that. Anyway, sorry.
For some reason, that one didn't connect with me. I don't know why. Yeah. So it was that. And the graphic design. I was going to school for graphic design and industrial design, and both are very aesthetically medical professions. You'll see white pages and clean typography and that sort of stuff. So that all kind of bled together.
The thing that I liked about it is that sometimes I'll stumble on an artist, and I don't want to be like negative or whatever, but sometimes it's like, man, like you just got a JPEG off Google Image and you made that your cover, and it doesn't give me that game to play. Like there's no satisfaction. Like if you're a collector and you really love listening to music like I do, it's nice to have like someone, it's nice to consume things where someone put thought into it, you know? And I feel like there's a consistency with your work. Can we talk about your mixing process? That was another thing I noticed. Your mixes are really clean. I noticed there's like a lot of, I don't know if there's headroom or whatever. I didn't look at it in a wave editor or whatever, but I was listening to it. I was like, man, these are really clean mixes. Can you go over your mastering kind of chain? You don't need to give away all the secrets. Like, I mean, you do one-on-one Zoom calls, like just a reminder to people. But if you could just kind of give us the Coles notes on what you do.
Honestly, there are no secrets. The most powerful thing that you have for mixing is your ear. And the best that I really appreciate your the kudos on the mixing. It's been honed over a while, and part of the things that I could say maybe have contributed to my sound are I listen to a ton of Rob Swire, and I think he's one of the best mixing guys as far as creating a very full sounding mix that I've heard. I grew up with a lot of rock and Linkin Park, probably like everyone else, but a lot of music that generated very full spectrum mixes. So I was constantly trying to figure out how to make things sound full. And then I grew up listening to music through the same pair of Sony MDR V6s that my dad had ever since I was like 5. So by the time I started producing music and I absolutely destroyed the pair that he had, I just went out and ordered another one because my ears have listened through those headphones for so long. I could go buy a much more expensive pair of Audio-Technicas or something else. But honestly, I'm so used to how those headphones deliver sound. 9 times out of 10, I could just throw a sound out there and I could equalize it right just because that's what I was used to. So I guess the tip I could pull out of it is like, if whatever you're used to listening to music from, or if you can get some pair of headphones or something that is consistent so that you're working through that pair of headphones or speakers all the time, so you get so familiar with them, that'll help you with the mix. And it's beyond that. The mixing and mastering process for me is keeping it as minimal as possible. I try to keep as much off of the master chain as I can. If it's like, oh, the track is too bassy, well, that's probably because something that's taking up the low end is a little off. So I'd rather go in and adjust the instrument itself and do as little on the master. And then finally, when I get up to the master, maybe just do a couple things to make it loud. That's about it.
That's great. We're getting towards the end of the interview. First of all, Dan, I really appreciate it. There's a couple of things I want to ask you. I want to ask you about your future projects, but before I get to that, I want to talk about your styles. Kind of, they jump all over the place. I know you had your old project Corporate, you know, and I was hearing a lot of glitch hop. I was hearing a lot of kind of neuro house. I was hearing a lot of drum and bass. Some songs were chill. Some songs were IDM. I'm wondering, was that on purpose? Was that intentional? Do you suggest for new artists to kind of experiment and release different genres under the same name, or do you suggest that they create different names and stick to one type of genre? You know what I mean?
Oh, that's a good question on the different names. To be honest, I haven't tested that enough to be able to answer it with confidence. Some artists, you know, they'll do glitch hop tracks under one name, they'll do drum and bass tracks under another name.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a reason to delineate that, albeit fans like consistency. There's an Instagram that I'm obsessed with right now, just from a marketing perspective, because it's the same guy from the same angle pouring a cup of pour over coffee every morning. And if you scroll down
Nice.
his Instagram feed, it is just the same shot over and over again.
Yeah.
And he's got thousands of followers on there, and it seems like he's doing pretty well. But I'm following him because I'm curious what he's going to be wearing and what mug he's going to be using, next Friday. So there's a point to consistency. You make a drum and bass track and it's good, and someone follows you because they're like, wow, I want to hear what drum and bass track he's going to come out with next. I just happen to be cursed with having way too many interests in way too many genres, and I go hear someone like Break produce a drum and bass track, and the snare has this beautiful crack to it, and I'm like, I wonder how I can do that. And then I go write in drum and bass track, and I'm like, should I create another name for this? And honestly, I just put it under the same name and hope that people will like a consistency that goes beyond a tempo and goes beyond a specific genre, because honestly, all of it I really like, and the work I think is beautiful as I'm working on it. And I hope someone else finds the same enjoyment, even if the tempo changes a little bit and such. Yeah, I hope people read between the lines.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like I struggle with the same thing, and when I'm listening, I'll listen to a band, and if they switch it up, if the coffee guy stops pouring coffee and he's like, it's just him eating pizza or something for the next 2 weeks, you're gonna be like, ugh. But it's at the same time, it's like you got to grow as an artist too, and you got to be able to express these. I don't know. I can't find the answer to that question ever. It's a weird double-edged sword for me. Dan,
yeah.
Thank you so much. Can we talk about your future releases? Do you have anything planned that's coming up, or?
It's been a while. I took a little break so that I could focus on the game design, learn the programming side, but obviously the music stuff came back. There's a much different, and almost a high that you get from producing something that you can listen to that works on a timeline. You hit play and you listen to it. Much different emotional response to that versus coding something or painting something. And I think that's what's really fun about all these different genres is you as an artist can get a much different reaction yourself from them as you're making them. So the point is I missed the high that I get from music. I'm working on a couple new tracks with my buddy Josh Brugman, who I happened to grow up with. He did some singer-songwriter stuff with vocals and guitar, and has just in the last few years dove into pop production, and he's getting so good and so talented. And we've done some stuff that I'm really proud of that's on its way. I've been doing a little bit of work with Ill Gates, so there's some stuff in the pipeline. I'm starting to spin up on the music stuff.
Awesome. And can you tell everybody where they could reach you for your music, your socials, and also if they want to have a session with you?
Absolutely. I stuck it all on this website, pedestriantactics.com. There's a big list of links to go to all of those things. Thankfully, that name is easily Googleable and links to all my socials as opposed to corporate. So yeah, you can go to that website, or you can just Google search and you'll find something that's me.
Great. We'll put it in the show notes too. Dan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'll end the show and I'll say bye. Thanks everybody. Take care and bye-bye.